medical correspondent Dr. John Torres, virologist and epidemiologist and NBC News science contributor Joseph Fair. Also, our business correspondent Stephanie Rule, NBC News consumer and investigative correspondent Vicky Nguyen, and NBC News and MSNBC medical contributor Dr. Kavita Patel. Before we get to our viewers' questions, I want to pick up on something Dr. Fauci said, and Joseph Fair, I'll put this to you. This idea that it could be in the air beyond just, someone sneezing or coughing. Does that explain perhaps why this has been so contagious?
Not necessarily. It really comes down to the coughing and the direct contact. There is limited evidence that, it can, as Dr. Fauci mentioned, very small droplets could suspend in the air for just a few moments. But I have to emphasize the overwhelming number of cases come from that direct contact when someone sneezes or coughs, and that comes into direct contact with your eyes, nose, or mouth, or you cough into your hand, shake hands with someone, and then they do the same route of transmission. All
right, let's get to some of the questions we received from viewers via Facebook. Dr. Torres, this one is for you. It's a question from Cheryl on Instagram. How can frontline medical professionals protect their families when they go home after a shift at the hospital? I think we all worry about that.
And as an ER doc, this is the same thing we faced back in the H1N1 epidemic we had in 2009 time frame. And what we would do there is when we got back to the house, because it's a big worry, you don't want to take it to your families, you would essentially undress before you went in the house. You would undress in the garage, undress in the bathroom, wherever you could. Put all those clothes in the washing machine, start the washing machine, get in the shower, take a shower, and then dress back in your clothes, and then you see your family at that point. That's the best way you can protect yourself. And again, you want to make sure overemphasizing that washing of the hands, because throughout the day you're touching a lot of patients, a lot of surfaces they might have been near. You cannot overemphasize washing the hands and clean all the areas. If you've been in a car, you want to clean the steering wheel, other things like that the family might get into. The bottom line is to protect them as best you can.
We need these folks there on the front lines of this. Exactly. Dr. John, thank you. This next question is from Katie on Instagram. Dr. Patel, I'll send this one to you. Is it safe for pregnant women to deliver at the hospital with a lack of PPE, personal protection equipment? Couldn't it easily be spread there? I deliver in 2 weeks, she writes.
Lester, this is a very important question because this could go on for months and people will need to feel that their hospitals are taking the precautions. Most hospitals are actually, not only are they going through what they always do every day to make sure that they're clean and kind of keeping with current sanitation standards, but most hospitals, urban and rural, are actually doing what we would call respiratory isolation for patients suspected with coronavirus, and that includes their own healthcare workers. So the message to pregnant women is to have these honest discussions with their obstetricians in advance and understand exactly what their doctors are doing to take care of them. But be rest assured that the country is absolutely prepared, not just to take care of coronavirus patients, but remember, we've got 1 million hospital beds that have patients in them all the time for all sorts of things, including delivering babies safely.
Yeah, that's an important point. Thank you. And Joseph Fair, this is a question from Paula. It came on Instagram. What makes this virus different from all others that it's caused this many life-altering changes worldwide? You're certainly a veteran of dealing with pandemics and epidemics.
Well, approximately 70% of what we call emerging infectious diseases come from wild animals, and this virus came from a wild animal market in Wuhan, presumably. And when those viruses are introduced into humans, they're not new viruses. They're new to science, meaning we haven't seen them before, and they're new to humans. We have typically, as human beings, we have what we call herd immunity, meaning we've been exposed to a virus like coronavirus, the common coronaviruses. We've been exposed to those for generations, probably tens of thousands of years. So as a species, we've developed some immunity to them. However, every now and again, and increasingly in frequency, we have new viruses to which we have no herd immunity whatsoever. So our immune systems don't know how to react to them. They overreact, causing what we call the cytokine storm. And that leads to pathology and in some cases, death.
All right, John, this is a question from Kevin. It came in on Facebook. What is the mortality rate of people that have to be on ventilators? What are the odds of death once sick enough to be on a ventilator?
So we're still trying to focus on the mortality rate overall for people that contract coronavirus. And what we know from China, that seemed to be higher than it is in other parts of the world. Initially, they were saying around that 3.4%. I think a lot of people now are focusing on about 1% overall. But we know that in China, the study they did recently looking at critical patients, it was a very small study. It was around 50% mortality once they were placed on ventilators or they got to that critical stage. But you have to remember, this was in China. These are older people that had a lot of other health conditions. And once they did get on a ventilator, again, it was about 50% mortality.
All right, we're going to have more questions for all of you. We'll hear from more of our viewers throughout the hour. So please continue to send questions and weigh in on our Facebook survey about the issues most troubling and concerning to you. When we come back, a look at what we could learn from how this crisis is being met around the world. We hope you'll stay with us. This crisis is called a pandemic for a reason. It is worldwide in scope. Hundreds of thousands of confirmed cases in dozens of countries on every continent but Antarctica. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, has been tracking the outbreak and joins us now from London. Richard.
Lester, it is now in 160 countries and territories. There are only about 190 countries and territories on the globe, so it truly is a pandemic now. Here in Europe, there is rationing at supermarkets. Borders seem to be closing every single day. In Italy, the people get together. They are watching the TV at 6 o'clock every evening. The newscast comes, and it announces the daily death toll, and that death toll continues to go up. Germany's Angela Merkel says this is the worst crisis her country has faced since World War II.
Never in peacetime has the world looked like this. Cities across Europe now desolate. The people too scared or not allowed to go out. But finally tonight, some good news from China. It's seeing no new domestic infections. The bad news is the cost was freedom. In January, China locked down more than 50 million in its hardest hit province, dragging people away who didn't comply. I spoke with one of the UK's top virus trackers, epidemiologist Neil Ferguson, himself in isolation. He tested positive for the virus today.
Does the United States need to go like what China did?
I think in the short term, those are the only options. Unless you roll out testing on a massive scale and innovative approaches to contact tracing and isolation of cases, which the Chinese are now doing, and that's what Korea is doing.
When I saw what happened in China and the huge, tremendous restrictions, do you really think that's what we should be living with until we have a vaccine?
I think there are probably a range of models of how to do this. The Chinese have adopted one approach, which has come at a significant social cost.
In Spain, France, and Italy, they've chosen China Light, nationwide lockdowns without the repression. People can go out for essentials, and yet the death toll continues to climb. Today, a grim milestone in Italy where the number of fatalities has surpassed those in China. I spoke with Mattia Ferraresi, a journalist based in Rome who was one of the first to write an op-ed telling Americans to wake up. The virus is coming.
What would you say now to an average American, a young person who's feeling pretty good and might not feel that this is going to directly impact him or her?
Don't be selfish. It's the time to prove that you're not the only one person existing in this world, and a lot of things depends on your own action.
Now, Lester, Professor Ferguson told me one of the big dangers of this virus is its ability, its easy ability to overwhelm medical systems. And that is because he says about 5%, only 5% of the people who get coronavirus need to be hospitalized. But of that 5%, about a third of them need intensive care, need to be on ventilators, and that very quickly overwhelmed systems.
Yeah, the experiences overseas certainly being watched carefully here. Richard, thank you. Let's continue now with our crisis team of experts answering your questions. Dr. John, a question from Erica on Facebook. If you contract this and recover, are you immune from getting it again, like chickenpox? Let's assume there's a lot of people who now recovered. They probably want to go out now, can they?
To a certain extent, you are. And what we do know is once you get this virus, your body builds up antibodies to it, and so you're protected from getting it again. Unlike chickenpox, though, where you have a lifelong immunity, this one we think the immunity might be limited a year, maybe a little longer, but we're not sure it's going to be a lifetime.
Yeah, Stephanie, here's a question for you. It comes from Rigoberto on Facebook. Should we trust banks right now with our money? People are very unsettled by watching what's happening with the markets.
Well, the markets are unsettling. That is fair. But as far as your money in a bank, it's safe. If you've got your money in a bank that's insured, FDIC insured, which is most banks, an online bank or a traditional bank, it's insured for up to $250,000. Now, one of the reasons he might be asking is because a lot of people right now in cities like New York or San Francisco, where our movements are limited, people are taking a little bit of extra cash out of ATMs because it gives them a sense of security, but it's really not necessary.
All right, thanks for that. Joseph Fair. Natasha on Instagram asks, does the coronavirus always cause a fever?
You know, I'm actually going to have to defer to John on that one because sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, but it's more of a medical question.
So the coronavirus, there's a whole spectrum of symptoms you can get. It can be anywhere from people usually say I started off with nasal congestion, a dry cough, body aches, and then at a few days later, day 3, day 4, day 5, they start developing a fever. The thing with this fever, though, unlike the flu where it starts all of a sudden, it starts days in, but then all of a sudden it peaks pretty high once you start getting it. And so that's the big difference. You don't have to have a fever to have a coronavirus, and if you have coronavirus, you don't necessarily have a fever.
Yeah, all right. Dr. Patel, this is from Erica on Instagram, who wants to know, why does it take so long to get test results after the tests are given? And we seem to hear different answers about when they get the results.
Yeah, great question. And it does depend on where you get your tests. Certainly the largest lab providers in the country are they're actually working 24/7. I spoke to several of them, and they have staff working 24/7, but they literally have a backlog, Lester, of samples to process. There are tests, however, that are being developed in-house at hospitals, like at the Mayo Clinic and at others, where for their patients in the hospital, they are able to turn around those tests in a matter of hours. We do think that this backlog will work its way through, and hopefully in the next several days, we'll be able to turn around that test time to less than a day.
All right, Doctor, thank you for that. We'll have more to come from our panel and more answers to your questions. We'll also take a look at how Americans are confronting this crisis across the country, including a conversation with some governors on the front lines when we continue in just a moment. We have seen the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in this country climb day by day. First dozens, then hundreds, now thousands of cases in all 50 states. More than 13,000 as of tonight, nearly half of them in New York alone. And as testing ramps up, the numbers are certain to rise dramatically. In fact, we're already seeing that. New precautions are being taken by the hour, including tonight's stunning statewide stay-at-home order in California. Our correspondents across the country are following the story coast to coast.
I'm Jake Ward in Oakland, California. Up until now, we were part of a small cluster of counties that had been abiding by a shelter-in-place order, but now that has been extended across the state. What does that mean? Shelter-in-place basically means you have to stay in your house unless you're in some sort of essential activity. That includes things like if you're sick, you go to the hospital. If you need groceries, you go to the grocery store. If you need drugs, go to the pharmacy. But it also includes the right to go outside. You're allowed to exercise outside by yourself or in a small group. You just can't congregate with others. But the thing to consider here is this isn't just sort of a recommendation. This is a legally enforceable order, and anyone who doesn't abide by it can be prosecuted. But the point here is not to get anyone in trouble. The point, of course, is to keep all Californians safe by keeping us separate from one another.
This is Gabe Gutierrez in Brooklyn, where people have been lining up throughout the day to get inside one of those tents that have been popping up at hospitals across the country. They're waiting to get pre-screened to see if they meet the criteria for a COVID-19 test. Health workers tell us that if these crowds keep growing, they'll eventually run out of medical supplies, including protective masks and ventilators. Tonight, the American Hospital Association is calling on Congress to act, saying it needs $100 billion to deal with this emergency.
I'm Tom Costello in Maryland, where the governor is taking additional steps to enforce social distancing closing shopping malls and announcing anyone who treats this like a vacation and attends large gatherings that they're putting other Marylanders at risk and violating state law. Maryland now outlawing gatherings of more than 10 people and closing BWI Airport to non-workers or travelers. The governor also announcing the first child in the state who has the virus, a 5-year-old girl, and he warns this is only the beginning of the crisis.
I'm Blaine Alexander at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the world's busiest airport. But today, it is so empty that they have closed 2 security checkpoints. Now, earlier this week, part of the international terminal had to be cleaned after a TSA worker tested positive for coronavirus. It's something that we've seen at least 6 other airports around the country. Now, starting tonight, the city is going to look a lot like its airport. In fact, all Atlanta restaurants, bars, gyms, and other public spaces have been ordered to close starting at midnight.
I'm Garrett Hake in Chicago, where across the Midwest tonight, plants like this one are going silent. The big 3 automakers announcing yesterday they're shutting down production across.
We have seen the number of confirmed coronavirus cases in this country climb day by day. First dozens, then hundreds, now thousands of cases in all 50 states. More than 13,000 as of tonight, nearly half of them in New York alone. And as testing ramps up, the numbers are certain to rise dramatically. In fact, we're already seeing that. New precautions are being taken by the hour, including tonight's stunning statewide stay-at-home order in California. Our correspondents across the country are following the story coast to coast.
I'm Jake Ward in Oakland, California. Up until now, we were part of a small cluster of counties that had been abiding by a shelter-in-place order, but now that has been extended across the state. What does that mean? Shelter-in-place basically means you have to stay in your house unless you're in some sort of essential activity. That includes things like if you're sick, you go to the hospital. If you need groceries, you go to the grocery store. If you need drugs, go to the pharmacy. But it also includes the right to go outside. You're allowed to exercise outside by yourself or in a small group. You just can't congregate with others. But the thing to consider here is this isn't just sort of a recommendation. This is a legally enforceable order, and anyone who doesn't abide by it can be prosecuted. But the point here is not to get anyone in trouble. The point, of course, is to keep all Californians safe by keeping us separate from one another.
This is Gabe Gutierrez in Brooklyn, where people have been lining up throughout the day to get inside one of those tents that have been popping up at hospitals across the country. They're waiting to get pre-screened to see if they meet the criteria for a COVID-19 test. Health workers tell us that if these crowds keep growing, they'll eventually run out of medical supplies, including protective masks and ventilators. Tonight, the American Hospital Association is calling on Congress to act, saying it needs $100 billion to deal with this emergency.
I'm Tom Costello in Maryland, where the governor is taking additional steps to enforce social distancing, closing shopping malls, and announcing anyone who treats this like a vacation and attends large gatherings that they're putting other Marylanders at risk and violating state law. Maryland now outlawing gatherings of more than 10 people and closing BWI Airport to non-workers or travelers. The governor also announcing the first child in the state who has the virus, a 5-year-old girl, and he warns this is only the beginning of the crisis.
I'm Blaine Alexander at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the world's busiest airport. But today, it is so empty that they have closed 2 security checkpoints. Now, earlier this week, part of the international terminal had to be cleaned after a TSA worker tested positive for coronavirus. It's something that we've seen at least 6 other airports around the country. Now, starting tonight, the city is going to look a lot like its airport. In fact, all Atlanta restaurants, bars, gyms, and other public spaces have been ordered to close starting at midnight.
I'm Garrett Hake in Chicago, where across the Midwest tonight, plants like this one are going silent. The big 3 automakers announcing yesterday they're shutting down production across North America in an effort to protect employees. That means 150,000 workers won't be back at their jobs this month. And this morning, Harley-Davidson said they would shut down their plants as well after a worker at one of them was diagnosed with the virus. And here in Chicago tonight, the city's mayor said the nation's 3rd largest school district will stay shut until at least April 21st.
The view from around the country, and with thousands of people infected and more waiting to be tested, what should you do if you're home, if you're not sick enough to be hospitalized? Here's NBC News consumer and investigative correspondent Vicki Nguyen. Vicki.
Lester, we've been hearing the term self-quarantine. It's what you're supposed to do when you come into contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. But what if you're showing symptoms? What if you've been diagnosed with the virus? Well, now we're talking about self-isolation. And tonight we're going to show you the steps that you need to take in order to protect yourself and the rest of your family.
Northwell's Director of Global Health, Dr. Eric Choi Pena, helps us map out a plan for self-isolation. First, identify a room as home base for the sick person.
Once you've designated an area, is this the room you should be living in, sleeping in, eating in?
Ideally, yes. This should be the room that you're doing all of your activities of daily living and spending the majority of your day. This should be your home base.
When you need to leave that room, avoid everyone else in the home. And if you have a mask, wear it.
Show me the proper way to put on a mask.
Right. So the most important thing is to make sure you're covering your nose as well. But you pull the mask out like this. You're going to put both loops over your ears. Sometimes they tie in the back, and that's also fine. And then just make sure you're pinching the bridge of the nose so you get like a nice tight seal across your face.
Assign one bathroom to the infected person. If that's not an option, clean it after every use.
How important is it to clean all the surfaces?
So you want to go over all the surfaces, focusing on the areas that hands are going to touch the most.
That includes the sink, faucet, knobs, and countertop. Don't forget to clean handles on the toilet and doors.
What are the best disinfectants to use or the best ways to clean these things?
There's no particular disinfectant. Bleach works for everything. Lysol and all the other kind of EPA-approved disinfectants are also working well. They're all recommended by the CDC.
And when spraying disinfectant, don't wipe. Let it air dry to kill germs.
Another area of concern, laundry.
So this is a pretty low-risk area. I mean, you want to make sure that the patient is the person loading the dirty clothes into the washing machine, but washing them with other family members' clothes is fine. Just use enough of these pods or the detergents to make sure that you get a good soapy mix, and then, wash normally.
Precautions to stop the spread of this deadly new virus.
And the whole point of it is really to protect the rest of your community, protect your neighbors, protect your friends, protect your extended family, keep them safe, and it's really the responsible thing to do.
Now, if you need supplies while you're in self-isolation, a lot of grocery stores and restaurants now offer that contactless delivery where your order can be placed outside. With more people staying home, though, make sure that you are prepared for delays and that you order in advance. Now, Lester, I know later on, Kate Snow is going to have a piece about volunteers who are stepping up to help their community. First, let's get to one of those questions that's on people's minds. Edie asks on Facebook, why can't we get tests in Arizona? We get a runaround from our doctors. They say they don't have the test. And then the hospital says, go to your doctor. Okay, Edie, I understand your frustration. Things are changing daily. More tests are becoming available. Keep asking your doctor. Keep checking with your local health department. In the meantime, I want you to be aware that there are some scammers out there. Our consumer investigative unit has actually found people online trying to sell at-home test kits. Right now, the FDA has not approved an at-home test kit for the coronavirus. So be aware of that. Don't buy one. You won't know if it's real. You won't even know if it works. Okay, next question. Diane asks on Facebook, I'm doing my part to stay in for myself and the public. Should I cancel my dental appointment tomorrow? Short answer is yes, absolutely. Right now, the president has asked all Americans to stay at home for at least a 15-day period. That is simply the only weapon we have at this point to prevent the spread of this infection. So